Hey kids, welcome back to AMC's garage. Today we're going to be fitting this, my old Scottoiler, to this, my new Yamaha FZ1-N. So make yourself a brew, let's get stuck in. So this is my old universal Scottoiler that I bought from Lois, not designed for any particular bike, but I've taken this off of the Versys and now I'm going to stick it onto the Phaser. So the first challenge, we need to find somewhere to put it. I did some reading on the internet because forewarned is forearmed, and from a lot of the stuff that I was finding, people have been sticking their Scottoiler up here in the rear seat compartment, but to me, all of these positions seem very flat, and they're also wasting what is already a very restricted amount of space in this back end. I like to keep my toolkit and my puncture repair kit in the back here, so I want to be saving as much space back here as possible. Also, because I am recycling an old Scottoiler, I need to make sure that I'm not too far back in the bike. I had this originally mounted quite central on the Versys, which means the pipe I've got left for the oil is quite short. So I did a bit of further scouting, and I've discovered a nice big cavity in here with the brake fluid reservoir. I mean, that's a space easily big enough to poke your common garden Scottoiler into. And it gives me access to the top for changing settings, it gives me access for refilling the oil. Problem is, how do I mount it in there? And this is where I've stumbled upon the idea that there's two bolts sticking up through the metal plate here, and those bolts are attached to the rectifier. So what I've decided to do is to take this piece of bendy steel with holes in it, screw it onto one of those bolts, and then attach my Scottoiler to it so that it's mounted in there in that space with everything easy for me to get to. So the first challenge is going to be screwing this onto that bolt in there. Create myself a little bit of overhead lighting here. This piece is going to go in there like that on that bolt, and then I'm going to use this wing nut. I would prefer to have a nylock nut, but I don't have any handy at the moment, so I'll switch that later. This side panel off just to give me a little bit more access and also hopefully a slightly better view of what's going on. Attempt 1, fail. Imagine you can't see anything of what's going on now because it's in complete darkness. There we go, the wing nut is on. Lovely. We can cable tie our Scottoiler to this beastie. Poke that through roughly where it's going to end up. And then we get the oiler itself more or less into its final position. So now I'm seeing serious issues with using a wing nut because it's destroying all of my clearance. That's going to have to come out. I'm going to have to go and find a proper nylock nut. I'll be back in a sec. Well, there we go, half an hour later and I'm back with an nylock nut. It's one of the real benefits of living half a mile away from your garage, I suppose. When you forget something, it turns into an epic adventure to go and get it. Right, that is on and tight. So, we try again. Much better. Get right down into the gap now. There's what we're looking at. We need to cable tie that in place on that lovely new homemade bracket. Yeah, well, after a bit of heaving and hoeing, I've been reaching in there with these long nose pliers and I've actually twisted it to give it a bit of a zigzag, just so that it can be a slightly shallower angle. The oiler can come slightly deeper into this cavity. That'll give us a bit more clearance over the top with the saddle once that goes back on. So now I'm actually going to cable tie the thing down using these handy holes along the mounting cradle. Sorry about the darkness and the complete lack of visibility here. I've got to try and make this part of the video as short as possible just to keep you from falling asleep. Oh, I can see his little nobbin poking out. That's what she said. Reach in with the long nose pliers and pull it through. Hopefully that's not what she said. 2 cable ties ought to do it, I think. Well, that is about as fixed on as it's going to get. You can see from the top, it's got a little bit of a wobble in it, but I don't think that's anything that's going to be any problem. Then we can run our vacuum pipe off in that direction. Breather pipe can hook through here, sit over in this area somewhere. And so just as a quick check, stick the seat back on, make sure we're not getting any fouling or interference or anything. Yep, there we go. Nothing is touching anything. Clearance all around. That's good enough for me. Let's carry on. Well, now we're around the other side. I'm just going to stick the vacuum pipe up there out of the way. That's going to need to go into this sort of area at some point. The next big challenge is what to do with the actual oiling pipe, which needs to eventually end up down here. Already I can see this is going to be a bit of a challenge to make it reach. But fear not, because in the kit when I bought it there was enough left over that I think this should be able to do the job. If not, we might have to work out some kind of extension. But anyway, let's go with using this piece, which does, however, mean I've made my life deeply difficult for myself. So I'm just going to loosen off the bolt holding the brake fluid reservoir on. Poke that aside for a moment. Of course, what would make things a lot easier, I'm forgetting here, is that the reservoir itself isn't fixed to the cradle, so I can actually just pull that out, pop the hose off and connect the new one on. There's a very, very snug fit. I suppose I would much rather have a very, very snug fit than a very sloppy one. I'm sure a lot of you agree with me there. reseat the reservoir into the gradient. Bosh. See, now what I need to do, annoyingly, is get from this side over to that side, minimizing the risk of getting tangled up in the shock absorber, which is obviously continually bouncing up and down. I think to that end, I'm going to run this hose over the top of the mount so that it's nowhere near the moving parts. Let's get that off. So screw at the back and pop the plastic penises out of the rubber vaginas, stick it into the boot. This is where 12-inch long, 5mm wide fingers would come in handy, isn't it? So now that's coming from the reservoir through there, over the shock mount, and I'm going to cable tie it to this cable here to be double sure that it's staying away from that mount. Incidentally, I think I spend more money on cable ties than I do on petrol with motorbikes lately, so that's good. We then want to have this pipe come down in this direction, and there is a cable tie already holding a cable, and that cable goes down to some kind of a sensor which is on the rear underside of the engine, so I'm going to follow that down because I want to come around the swing arm, come along the bottom. Could be tempted to go through this hole here where the shock absorber goes through, but again, this whole thing's going to be bouncing up and down. I want to minimize the amount that this pipe is going to be flexing, so hijack that cable tie. It's almost impossible just to pull it through because the thing wants to coil up. There we go, so that's all pulled through. So you see we've come over the top of the mount, down here onto this sensor cable, and we're going to go around the main swing arm pivot. We should see our hose appear underneath. There we go. And now the mission is to come all the way back to the sprocket here. Wow, that is really close. It might even be too close. Have to wait and see. Now what I need to do is to create mounting points onto which this pipe can be affixed. Now already I'm seeing one possibility, and that is that I can come through this rubber chain guard thing here. That gives me two things in one. It's holding the pipe up, it's also protecting the pipe from the chain. We just need to worry about this last section. Ow! So now we need to create mounting points under here. I've seen people use cable ties which they've wrapped all the way around the swing arm, but I think that looks absolutely hideous. The original kit comes with these cool little hose clips which allows you to clip the hose in and out, but as you can see, I've already used those. Of course, I could stick some more double-sided sticky stuff onto those, but for today, I'm going to use the very close second place, which is these cable tie mounts. But first off, I'm going to use a squirt of WD-40, get rid of the worst of the crap off the bottom there. WD-40 is fantastic for cleaning almost anything on a motorbike. It just cuts through the crap. And the problem is, it then leaves everything with a greasy residue. And then to finish the job, I've got some glasses cleaning cloths, which, thanks to their alcohol base, do a wonderful job of degreasing stuff. Plus they cost about €1 for a packet of 80. Now while we let that get completely dry, this is the clip onto which the nozzle mounts, and that needs to go here onto the same point that this bobbin is connected to. So you need to pop this off the stand, unscrew that, attach this in between, and you should be good to go. Putting a bike on and off of a paddock stand when it doesn't actually have grab rails is somewhat more of a challenge. I found with this one that grabbing hold of this is a close second to the grab rail. Now on the Kawasaki, I had the issue that this hole was way too small. I had to make it bigger. Now it's the opposite way around. Once it's tight, it shouldn't matter. I won't do that up completely tight just yet. Tight enough for the bobbin, obviously, to support the weight of the bike. Loose enough that I can move this clip about because I need to line it up properly once I get the nozzle on there. So once again, onto the stand. My hand on the passenger foot peg, shoulder on the rear fairing. Jobby's on, and bosh, we're up again. And now we should be able to stick these beasties onto the bottom there without too much fear of them coming off again. One. Never fully understood why they make these in black and then put white sticky pads on them. There's two, and to be honest, two should be enough. Supported at this end, it's going to be supported at that end. So for this, I actually need to take the nozzle off of the end of the old pipe, which is held on by a Jubilee clip, and that bit's just stuffed in the end of the pipe there. And then attach this to the new pipe. Now, before I go any further, I'm just going to check that this will actually reach. Yes, but by God, is that close. So then the outer sheath goes over the top there, and then the Jubilee clip goes over the outer sheath, the nozzle and the pipe, and clamps the whole thing together thusly. But I'm going to spin it around to the front just so it's a bit more out of sight and it all looks a little bit more tidy. That is all together with the nozzle now sitting nicely with a small gap between it and the sprocket, delivering oil into the corner of this little recess here so that then the centripetal force of the spinning sprocket sends it outwards and onto the rollers of the chain. So now that's done, we can tighten these bad boys up. Second thoughts, I think I will put some more in there. Nothing else, just so it looks a bit more tidy. There's one in the middle, and a nice little cable tie holding you in place. All right at the very end, just to get rid of this unsightly bow here. I didn't think I would ever have the need to say unsightly bow before I was 40, but there you go. Life is full of surprises. And then, lest I forget, tighten the bobbin fully. Marvellous. Right then, well now the rear end is done, we need to deal with the front end, namely this bit. The standard Scottoiler is vacuum operated. Vacuum created by the throttle bodies is used to tell the Scottoiler when to run and when to shut off. So when the engine's running, the vacuum opens the valve, oil pours through to the chain and the sprockets. When the engine stops, the vacuum stops, the Scottoiler switches off, and you don't end up with an embarrassed bike standing in a puddle of its own oily wee. So we need to get this vacuum pipe in there, connected up to the throttle body somehow. And to do this, we're going to need to get underneath the petrol tank. So that means, first of all, taking off this plastic fairing at the front. Once that's off, undo these Allen bolts at the front left, front right corners of the bike. We can then lift the tank up, being careful not to lift the tank too high up without disconnecting the fuel line, because otherwise it's going to become under tension and you're going to be putting undue stress onto your fuel connections. I have to say actually I am very, very happy about being back to this setup. With the Kawasaki you had to take the whole tank completely off, but just like with the Phaser 600 I had, this is a hinge, which means that you can lift the tank up like the bonnet of a car almost. It's a bonnet full of petrol, but a bonnet all the same. We have options when it comes to propping this up. You could stick something like a mallet into the gap here on the top of the airbox, or, as I'm going to do just to be safe, you can also run a luggage strap through this little slot in the front lip of the tank and then tie that to something overhead, because I'm using this more as security just in case this mallet lets go. Here we can see already, this here, pipe with a white stripe on it, is one of the vacuum pipes. There's actually 4 of these, and they're being connected to each other. These are the pipes that you would use if you wanted to balance your throttle bodies, and quite nicely of Yamaha, they've already connected those up to the throttle bodies and then terminated them at each other, so that when you want to balance your throttle bodies, you don't need to go right in there. You can just separate these pipes and connect those up to your gauges. But what that also means is that we have a very handy, easily accessible way to connect into the vacuum system. Using the T-piece that came in the kit originally, and a tiny little piece of vacuum pipe, just to hijack that connection between the 2 pipes. First what I need to do is disconnect one of them. You see that central nozzle, which is actually blanked off. Air doesn't pass through that. That's basically just a double-ended bung. We've got a whole raft of double entendres in this episode, haven't we? The double ender blocks both pipes off. We're going to jump into that by connecting my short bit onto the double ender and then connect the T-piece back into the original vacuum pipe. There we go. There's my hijacked vacuum system. And then we connect the end of the vacuum pipe from the Scottoiler onto that T-piece. But first, I'm going to come under the battery strap, under the fuel tank bridge, and you guessed it, I'm going to cable tie it to this cable here just to make sure things don't jump around. Jump up, or get down. Then I'm going to use my old favourite trick of hijacking this cable tie thingy. So now we'll follow this loom along here, tuck under there. Might even chuck a cable tie in there, why not? As at this point we see that my vacuum piece is actually way too long. But this is nice and easily fixed because this just pops off. About that long should do it. And then stuff that back onto the pipe. Then we just need to loop that round, connect it onto the smaller piece of the T there. Bosh, that is connected. So at this point, I want to close this up, so I'm going to have a quick, crazy cable tie, trimming, frenzy, making the most of having the snippers in my hands. And so now, safety strap off, take away bonnet strut, lay the tank down, making sure that there's no crimps in the fuel line, ensure to seat the corners of the tank into the 2 corners of this weird mounty thingy here, and I'm going to leave that as it is at the moment. I'm not going to bolt it down because I want to make sure that all of this works before I go any further. So now I've got it all installed, but the problem is our pipe is completely empty, so it's all full of air. So all we need to do is to prime the system, which means we need to force oil through, but in order to do that it needs to be full of oil. So we'll disconnect the breather pipe, stuff the end of our filling nozzle into it, fill the beastie full of oil. Okay, so that is now full of oil, but it can't go anywhere because the Scottoiler is switched off, and as I said, the pipe is full of air. So we need to turn the settings to prime, turn on the engine, and then squeeze this bottle to force the oil down into the system. she blows. Here it comes. Almost there. Stay on target. And then, as if by magic, there it is. Oil coming out of the nozzle at the end. The system is now primed. So now once we've primed it, we need to take off our filler bottle again, connect back the breather pipe so that the system can draw air into the top in order to let the oil flow out through the bottom. The idea is now we want to program this so that 1 to 2 drops come out per minute. To do that, I'm just going to bend it away, get the old stopwatch out, that's something to drip into. I'm going to press the start button when the first drop comes out, see how many drops we get per minute on this halfway setting. Incidentally, thank you for noticing my super clean chain. I actually ran it through the Max cleaner yesterday. If you want to see how the Max chain cleaning system works, check out the video in the link up at the top right. And as the hooker said to the plumber, here comes the first drip. So there's drip number 1, and the timer has started. So hopefully we should be getting 1 to 2 drips per minute. It'd be fantastic if I've accidentally, completely by chance, set it perfectly. To be honest, it's looking good. I think I maybe would even put money on it at this point. I should in fact also mention that whenever you're doing anything like this, running the bike in your garage, make sure you leave the door open, because the stuff coming out of the pipe there is lethal. Okay, so that was more than a minute for 1 drip. Which means we need to come up here, give it a click or 2 more. Let's try that. There's the drip, start the clock. This is probably the world's least exciting timed event. Thank God for the internet. Oh, here comes the drip. 9 seconds left. Bosh, there's the drip at 55. I think that's about perfect then. I'll just give it 1 more click, because that was on the low end of our desired envelope. There we go. That'll do nicely. Oh, hello. So we just push that back onto the sprocket. Yes, thank you very much. Such an attention whore, aren't you? Bolt that brake fluid reservoir back into place. I don't want him flapping around in the breeze. Just going to whack a cable tie around those two just for a little bit more robustness, security, tidiness, call it what you like. That side panel goes back on. That side panel goes back on. Screw the tank back on. Stick our tank cowling back on. Then with everything put back together, one last look at our nice, neatly custom, out-of-the-way mounted Scottoiler before we stick back on pilot seat, co-pilot seat, and that's it. Yamaha FZ1-N now with a Scottoiler. So hopefully this nice shiny looking chain will remain like that for a good few thousand miles more. Thanks very much for watching. Hope to see you again soon in another episode of AndyManCam's Garage, when we'll be doing some more wonderful stuff to this quite frankly beautiful machine. Ta-ra!